a potential man, what does it truly mean? Well, it seems as though the definition changes depending on who you're talking to. However, if you had to ask me what the true definition of a potential man was, well, I would say it's somebody who's hyped up over the course of the entirety of their manga to have an insane amount of latent or potential power. However, every single time that person has an opportunity to display that latent or potential power, they come up short. Either because they simply weren't as strong as we were told, or because they were trying to use the fullness of their power against somebody who was just simply stronger than them. And thus, to me, at its core, a potential man, or woman, but we're just gonna refer to all of them as potential men, is somebody with potential who never lives up to said potential. But with that definition in mind, a couple of names are probably popping into your head right now. Names of characters who you had high hopes for that unfortunately came up short. But amongst all of those character names flooding into your brain right now, who's the worst? Who is hyped up as having the most potential and yet falling the flattest? Who has the biggest delta between what they were supposed to accomplish and what they actually did? Well, today, that's the question we're gonna be answering. Because today, we're talking anime's biggest potential men ranked and explained. But before we get to ranking or explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional Nick video every single week, guys, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. We are done with the preliminary matches, which means we are on to Jiraiya. But before we get into all that, today I want to talk to you about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Factor. Listen, Factor understands that this time of year, it's tough to keep those pesky fitness goals within grasp, which is why Factor wants to make it easier for you to make intentional, balanced food choices. They want to help you build and maintain nourishing habits through your meals. And even though it may not be the new year yet, it is never too early to get a jump start on your fitness goals. It's also never too late. See, Factor delivers fresh, never frozen, dietitian approved, and delicious meals to your front door every single week that you can heat up in your microwave and have ready to eat in just 2 minutes flat. Designed to help support your wellness journey, Factor takes the stress out of cooking and eating so you can stay focused on your other goals. And whatever those goals are, Factor can help you achieve them because Factor offers a litany of different meal plans like keto, protein plus, GLP-1 boosters, low carb, and so much more. And when those Factor meals packing more than 30 plus grams of protein help support your muscle repair and recovery, Factor has dedicated itself to maximizing how you enjoy your protein with them, offering new protein options like short ribs, salmon burgers, and bison sausages as part of their extended protein lineup. But there's a big difference between showing and telling, so let's head down to the kitchen and cook us up some Factor. Today we're gonna be cooking up the poblano cream pork chop.
Like all of the other Factor meals, all you gotta do is slide off that cardboard, poke a couple of holes. The tool would be good for this. Poke a couple of holes in the plastic here. Open up your microwave. Hit that number 2 button and you're off to the races. Now that our meal is heated, it's ready to be eaten.
So let's get a little bit of that pork chop, a little bit of that cream base.
That base is savory. That pork chop is tender. There's a little bit of heat in there. Oh, that's good.
So what are you waiting for? Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code TWCFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for a year. That's code TWCFB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus free breakfast for a year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription. Hitting your macros has never been so easy as it is with Factor. So before we dive into this list, because it seems as though some people are confused on what a true potential man is, I want to lay down some ground rules. There's going to be a couple of names that are left off this list that some of you believe should be on this list. Names like Rock Lee. See, people believe that characters like Rock Lee, who are hyped up as powerful, though never win any fights, are potential men on account of the fact that they're displayed as strong, they're talked about as strong, but every single time that strength comes into play in any serious kind of way, they come up short. And well, yes, that is annoying from Rock Lee, because he is talked about by both Kakashi and Mike Guy as a genius of hard work. We see him take out Naruto before the Forest of Death with one strike. He's seconds away from killing Sasuke, but every single time after Rock Lee schooled Naruto and Sasuke simultaneously that Rock Lee has been involved in a fight, he comes up short. Whether that's failing to save Sakura by clutching up the 1v3 versus Team Dosu, losing to Gaara or needing to be saved by Gaara in the battle against Kimimaro, time and time again, even though Rock Lee is referred to as the greatest taijutsu user in the Leaf by Mike Guy, Rock Lee comes up short. But Rock Lee never had potential. Rock Lee had negative talent. He is born with a literal literal detriment in the Naruto world. He had to grind and claw for every single ounce of strength he got. It's just that the strength that he was able to get his hands on wasn't enough. He was never talked about as a genius who'd be able to achieve anything he ever wanted. He was talked about as a case study of what hard work can accomplish. And thus the point you should take away from that is that in order to be considered on this list, you have to be born with some kind of latent talent, some legendary lineage, some legendary ability, a once-in-a-generation genius who accomplishes well, not as much as they should, at least. And thus characters like Genos, who technically wasn't born with anything and has just been modifying his body throughout the entirety of One Punch Man, or Rock Lee, who was definitely born with nothing, are not going to be considered on this list. Now, with all that said, let's get to our honorable mention. I have 7 entries that I feel very confident about today, but I wasn't so confident putting this honorable mention on the list. 1, because I don't know a whole lot about the universe, and 2, because from what I do know about the universe, I wouldn't say they fit the definition perfect. And ironically enough, this entry being placed as an honorable mention is probably going to ruffle some feathers, both because some people believe that he shouldn't be on the list at all, and other people believe that he should be much higher. And thus, at our honorable mention spot on our potential man list, we have Gohan. Now, I know some of you are already reaching for your pitchforks. You believe that Gohan is the true #1 clearest example of a potential man in all of manga and anime. And yes, Gohan has probably been more hyped with less given to us than a lot of characters in all of anime. Gohan, after all, was the first half-human, half-Saiyan hybrid we were ever introduced to. And he was constantly talked about all throughout Dragon Ball Z and even into Dragon Ball Super as having a higher potential power level than that of his own father, a full-blooded Saiyan in Goku. In fact, the way that Gohan's spoken about for the majority of his time in Dragon Ball led the majority of viewers to believe that at some point in time, Gohan was going to become the new protagonist of the Dragon Ball universe, the true strongest being in Universe 7. And a lot of people in the Dragon Ball fan base still believe that Gohan has the potential to be the strongest person in Universe 7. And there was a lot of basis for these claims. Gohan displayed a power level of 710 in the battle against Raditz, which at that time was higher than Goku's. And he was like 4, and he kept growing stronger as a child until eventually he was the only one the Z Fighters could trust to take on Cell. And with Rage boosting his powers seemingly more than anybody else in the entire show, Gohan was able to accomplish some absolutely ludicrous feats for a child. However, as time progressed, Gohan became less and less interested in the concept of fighting against aliens his entire life, and thus he stopped training and rather went into academia studying bugs or something stupid like that. And thus everybody seemingly passed him in power. That is, of course, until Gohan inevitably gets pulled back into the fight and trains for a substantially shorter amount of time than everybody else, but still catches up to their powers. I mean, whether it's having his powers unlocked or his ultimate unlocked by people like Guru or Elder Kai, or simply just training for like 2 hours because he gets pissed off, Gohan with substantially less work than everybody else in the cast is able to catch up to the highest level of transformations that everybody else has currently achieved. Whether that be with things like his ultimate form, which was comparable to that of Super Saiyan Blue, or Beast Gohan, which many believed at that current moment was the strongest transformation we'd ever seen in Dragon Ball. But the thing is, Gohan wins. Like, yes, there's a lot of people out there that ask the question, oh, well, how strong would he be if he actually trained as much as everybody else? And like, obviously, because of that, Gohan probably could be stronger than he currently is. But Gohan is able to train for like 1/1000th of the time of Goku and achieve basically the same results. I mean, like, yeah, he loses more than he wins, but he was still the person responsible for killing Perfect Cell. And in him and Piccolo's movie, Dragon Ball Super Superhero, he's able to beat a new, basically much stronger version of Cell again. Now, he does lose, like, a lot. He loses to Raditz, he loses to Vegeta, he loses to Frieza twice, he loses to Bootanks, Rakumi breaks his neck, and he loses to Beerus. And a lot of people will tell you, oh, but if he trained as much as everybody else, he would have been able to win all these fights. And that is potential man behavior. But like, Gohan trains for 2 hours and is able to battle against his father using Super Saiyan Blue. And therefore, to me, while he does have potential man-like qualities, I don't think he is quite one exactly. But that could just be because he clutched up against Cell. And honestly, I think that carries some weight. But with Gohan out of the way, let's get into our actual list. Because coming up at number 7 on our list, ranking and explaining anime's worst potential men, we have Ace. Now listen, I understand his inclusion on this list is going to have a couple of light novel readers on my ass. Oh, actually, if you read the light novels, Ace has accomplished a lot. I haven't read the light novels. I'm sorry. I'm barely keeping up with the manga. I'm like 3 chapters behind. It's Majulo season. Anyways, Ace, as the only living child of Blackbeard, the former king of the pirates, had an insane amount of potential to be a ridiculously high-level pirate. And yet, in terms of what he actually actually accomplished in One Piece, well, there's not a whole lot to say. See, yes, over the course of One Piece, we've gotten a bunch of flashbacks that have shown us Ace doing cool and wonderful things. Like in chapter 1100, we saw Ace defeating an unnamed warlord. And before his battle against Blackbeard, he's able to defeat not only Jesus, but also Van Augur from Blackbeard's crew. But those are really his only important victories ever. He tied Yamato in a fight. He tied Jinbei in a fight. He lost when he challenged Whitebeard. He lost in a fight against Akainu. And more importantly than anything, he lost in a battle against Blackbeard. He was basically gifted one of the greatest devil fruits in all of One Piece, and the Flame fruit, a Logia type that made him invulnerable to any kind of attack not coated with Haki, became the 2nd Division commander of the strongest pirate crew in One Piece at the time with no feats, fumbled Yamato, went to jump Blackbeard even though Whitebeard told him not to do it, is revealed in the flashbacks to have all 3 kinds of Haki, for some reason doesn't use any of them in the fight against Blackbeard, then gets beat by Blackbeard, spared by Blackbeard, turned into Enies Lobby, cannot escape on his own, drags Whitebeard and the entirety of his armada into Marineford, and basically destroys the Whitebeard pirates with his own idiocy. And mind you, this is a guy that Sengoku said the Marines had to kill because if they left him alone, he had the potential to stand atop the summit of the pirate world one day. And yet he gets one shot by Akainu because for some reason he doesn't use ornament Haki. Sengoku was so afraid of Ace's potential that he decided that it was necessary to kill Ace even if it meant war with Whitebeard. And what did that man do? Nothing. Potential Man. On to the next one. Because coming up at number 6 on our list of anime's worst potential men of all time, we have Chad, also known as Sabo, aka the man that Ichigo could never imagine losing. See, Chad is displayed in the early parts of Bleach as being one of the strongest people we've ever seen, at least amongst humans. When an iron beam falls on top of Chad, he lifts it off himself with ease. He's a professional boxer who participates in televised matches. His bare fists were enough to injure hollows in combat. And because of Chad's training with basic spirit energy, with Kukakushiba, it was revealed that he had ridiculously high natural affinity for spirit energy. And eventually, after some pretty serious training, Chad was shown to have a level of strength that allowed for him to defeat lower-ranked Espadas in combat. But then Chad began to get Fullbringer abilities that allowed for him to capitalize on the strength of his arms, with his right arm being known as the Brazo Derecha de Gigante, which he could use to channel his Ryatsu into to increase his punching ability or turn it into a shield for defense. And his left arm known as the Brazo Izquierda del Diablo, which has an ability known as La Muerte, which just means death, which when you're hit with it just crucifies you, literally. And yet in every single fight Chad is involved with, L after L after L, whether it was foolishly trying to take on Shunsui or losing to the Shrieker, Ichigo unfortunately very quickly had to come to grips with the idea of Chad losing, and thus, Potential Man. But not the worst Potential Man from Bleach. No, that's later on the list. But at least Chad wasn't born a once-in-a-generation genius with a genetic advantage that was supposed to make their eyes real special. No, because that honor is reserved for our number 5 spot. Because coming up at number 5 on our list of anime's worst Potential Men, we have Neji. Imagine being Neji, born to the twin brother of the head of the Hyuga clan, and thus coming from technically the same genetic lineage as the heads of the Hyuga clan. However, because your father was born after his twin brother, you are cast out to the side branch side of the family. Now, the Hyuga caste system would tell Neji that even though he is genetically a half-sibling to the daughter of the head of the Hyuga clan, Hinata, that legally as Hinata's cousin and a member of the side branch family, that he means substantially less to the Hyuga than Hinata. Well, that's the kind of thing that would light a fire under your butt to try and make you as powerful as possible. And that is exactly what happened with Neji. See, Neji not only came out of the womb as an incredibly talented Hyuga and potential Byakugan user, but was also deeply motivated as a member of the side branch family to show the main branch that he could achieve just as much power as them, if not more. And thus, over the course of the majority of part 1 of Naruto, Neji is talked about as a genius, unparalleled by anybody in Konoha outside of maybe Sasuke. He is the goal for uniquely talented ninjas like Rock Lee, and he's actively compared in strength to other characters in the Chunin Exams arc like Gaara. His uncle Hayashi Hyuga, Hinata's father, talks about him as a once-in-a-generation talent, one of the most talented Byakugan users of all time, and he backs this up. Simply by watching Hayashi Hyuga do the rotation, Neji's able to reverse engineer it and teach it to himself, a technique that technically only the head of the Hyuga clan should have access to. Neji, as a 13-year-old, is busting it out. In fact, by the time that the time skip between Naruto and Naruto Shippuden comes about, Neji is talked about as potentially the greatest Gentle Fist user of all time. And yet the 16-year-old who's reportedly the greatest Gentle Fist user of all time only has 2 manga canon victories over the course of all of Naruto's 700 chapters. And those 2 victories are against a substantially undertrained Hinata and the second weakest member of the Sound Village 5. Yes, is Neji absolutely able to dunk on Hinata in a battle of Gentle Fists in the preliminary matches? 100%. I mean, he literally stops her heart. But by the time that Nagato invades Konoha, Hinata has very seemingly closed the gap in terms of strength between herself and Neji. And while yes, Neji's battle against Kidomaru was impressive, even more so in the anime, as Neji busts out something never before seen in the manga, which is 8 trigrams, 128 palms, Neji almost basically dies in a 1v1 against the second weakest member in the Sound Village 5, and is only really able to eke out a victory against Kidomaru because Kidomaru, for some reason, attached spiderwebs to every single one of the arrows he fired, which to this day still makes no sense. He was making new arrows every single time. Why attach a string? And yet this greatest ever Gentle Fist user and the king of the Byakugan never fights Sasuke, never fights Rock Lee, and dies the second a real enemy comes around in Madara / Obito / the Ten Tails to a bunch of sticks that he probably could have Gentle Fisted away. And sure, yeah, I get it. He was out of chakra. But I'm not even saying try to use rotation. I know how chakra intensive rotation is. But just earlier, against the same opponent, the Ten Tails, we saw the combined forces of Hinata and Neji working simultaneously, using a double vacuum palm, push away one of the Ten Tails' tails. Use a vacuum palm, turn those wooden sticks away, or, you know, throw yourself in front of them. So for the egregious sin of being hyped up as one of the strongest members of the Konoha 12 and being forgotten by the plot, you, Sir Neji Hyuga, have been slapped with the title of Potential Man. But we're not done with the potential boys, because coming up at number 4 on our list of anime's worst potential men, we have Toshiro Hitsugaya. Boof. Where do we start? When Captain Hitsugaya is originally introduced to us in Bleach, he's talked about a captain with near infinite potential. The wielder of an ice-based Zanpakuto, he makes people like Rukia incredibly jealous. And with the reveal of his Bankai, Captain Hitsugaya seemed as though he was truly living up to his potential as one of the strongest captains amongst the Gotei 13. And while his Bankai overall just increases his freezing ability, allowing for him to grow ice crystals on people by opening holes in the clouds and the snow that falls down when it comes into contact with people's skin, slowly but surely freezing their entire bodies, creating huge ice pillars that Hitsugaya is slowly but surely able to push in on his opponents, crushing them with their weight, or even something as simple as stabbing somebody with his Zanpakuto and blowing them away into a giant icicle sheerly through contact. The potential for Captain Hitsugaya to be an incredibly powerful combatant was made clear very quick. Not only was he talked about incredibly hyperbolically, but also he was the youngest person we ever saw use Bankai. However, his Bankai is incomplete. That is until the end of TYBW, but we're not gonna talk about that. But still, even with an incomplete Bankai, one would assume that this incredibly talented, incredibly prophetic captain would have some good shots at winning pretty much all of the battles he's involved in. But no. See, Captain Hitsugaya loses not once, but twice against Aizen. And while losing against Aizen isn't really a knock against you, Toshiro's defeats don't end there. As when TYPW rolls around, Captain Hitsugaya also gets absolutely blown away by Baz B, after which he's turned into a mindless zombie. Yeah, he's not only killed, but he's also forced to join the side of the Stern Ritters. And as a controlled, mindless zombie that should hold on to the infinite potential of Captain Hitsugaya, that zombie then proceeds to lose to Captain Mayuri. And while those 4 people that Hitsugaya has lost to are all very powerful people, if you're gonna constantly hype up Hitsugaya as this ridiculously powerful, potential-filled captain who's gonna take over the world, throw them a victory every once in a while. But yes, he does get his moment at the end of TYPW, which is why he's only getting our number 4 spot on this list. But cracking into the number 3 spot, we have our first potential woman, because coming up at number 3 on our list of the worst potential men in all of anime, we have Momo Yaoyorozu, aka the vice class representative of Class 1A. A girl so incredibly talented that she got into UA through special recommendations. And as she got into UA through special recommendations and immediately became the vice class representative under Ida, Momo is constantly talked about as a genius, as a ridiculously high-level combatant. And this makes sense. I mean, after all, this is a girl who can make literally anything with the lipids in her body. You want night vision goggles? You want a cannon? You want a cannon? You want a cannon? Well, then Momo can make that for you. And even amongst the relatively loaded loaded roster of students that were in Class 1A, Momo received first place in her quirk apprehension test, which was kind of insane when you consider the fact that all of her classmates possess some kind of superhuman trait. And yet Momo, whose ability is to create things, somehow eked out first place. And yet, every single time Momo gets thrown into combat, we spend more time talking about her genius than displaying her genius. Sports Festival, loses to Tokuyami. Make a flashbang. Make a bunch of flashbangs. Make a floodlight. I don't know. Joint training battle, loses to Itsuka. In the first movie, her enable laser acts as the first line of defense against Nine, Slice, and I think Chimera. Doesn't even phase Nine. Air wall, blocks all of the cannon shots from Momo. And then they just blow Momo and Ioma away. USJ incident, Denki, Momo, and Jiro are fighting against a bunch of unnamed villains. And thank God for Denki, the human Pikachu. He's able to shock a bunch of the villains, knocking them out. And Momo's able to protect herself and Jiro by making an insulated blanket. But immediately after they're done using Momo for fan service, a guy named Tesla grabs Denki and they have to be saved by Snipe. Tetsu and Momo try to fight against a Nomu in the forest training camp arc, and they get so dusted by the Nomu it literally spares them. But don't worry, she makes a rail gun in the battle against the final version of All for One, whose laser beam gets blocked. She's never accomplished anything. She deserved so much better, and she's a potential woman. But she's not as bad as our number 2 spot, because our number 2 spot kicked off this list in the first place, because coming up at number 2 on our list of anime's worst potential men, we have Megumi. Listen, the only reason we're making this list today is because in the most recent chapter of Majulo, Yuka busted out Big Raga the Opstapa, also known as Maharaga. Listen, there was a fair amount of hints that readers read way too much into over the course of JJK that made people believe that Megumi was gonna be something more than he was. And listen, I'm not saying that Megumi never accomplished anything. Megumi is one of the youngest people we've ever seen use a domain expansion. However, we never got to see his completed domain expansion. Chimera Shadow Garden is an incomplete domain expansion. I'm sorry. It doesn't have a barrier technique applied to it. Megumi can fall into his own shadow. It's got the very clear and obvious weakness that anything that falls into Megumi's shadow, he has to maintain the weight of. And yes, while in the confines of Chimera Shadow Garden, Megumi gets 120% boost to his cursed techniques. Nanami gets that by the clock hitting 5:01 p.m. However, because Gojo, in order to cheer up Megumi, once told him how there was a 6 Eyes and Limitless user who was killed by a 10 Shadows user, readers all across the globe believed at some point Megumi was going to be able to rival Gojo. But nope. In actuality, what was actually being hinted at was Sukuna taking over Megumi's body and then, imparting a message to Gojo. Outside of that, we never once see Megumi land a Black Flash. The story is needlessly dragged on by the fact that nobody wants to kill Sukuna because he has Megumi as a vessel. Sukuna is almost killed by Angel/Hana. However, on account of the fact that Sukuna is inside of Megumi's body, Hana lets up and therefore Sukuna gets to survive. The only reason that Sukuna stands a chance in combat against Gojo is because he steals the 10 Shadows ability from Megumi and then is able to defeat Maharaga, adding it as one of his usable Shikigami and forcing Yuji to literally change his entire battle plan to augment and dismantle to separate Megumi from Sukuna's soul. On top of this, when Yuta was able to hit Sukuna with Angel's Curse technique as he applied it to the barrier technique of his domain expansion, the reason that they weren't able to separate Megumi from Sukuna in that moment is because Megumi turned them away. However, Megumi's not entirely useless. Yes, he gets dusted by Todo and Hanami, is barely able to battle against Dagon in a battle of domain expansions, is barely able to defeat Kirara in battle with the help of Panda, has to run for his life in a battle against his father that his father literally opts out of, loses to a one-figure Sukuna who Gojo literally played with, and tried to kamikaze himself every single time he was pushed into a corner with Maharaga, going so far as to use it against a no-name sorcerer whose curse technique is unironically luck. And yeah, Megumi's got a pretty impressive roster of losses. However, he did defeat a finger bearer and Reggie Star, and that's gotta count for something. But even Megumi pales in comparison to who I believe is the biggest potential man in all of anime and manga history, because coming up at number 1 at our top spot of the worst potential men in all of anime history, we have Shisui. See, because the difference between Shisui and Megumi is that Megumi has feats. Shisui, who is constantly talked about as one of the strongest Uchihas of all time on account of the fact that he awoke his Mangekyo Sharingan at 7 years old, and the Kodo Matsukame is referred by many in the fanbase and many in the universe as the greatest genjutsu of all time. And thus Shisui, who is one of the youngest ever members of the Anbu and one of the youngest ever captains in the Anbu, was going to use the power of this, the greatest genjutsu in all of Naruto, to trick Fugaku into thinking without him realizing, no, I don't want to launch a coup against Konoha. And yet before he was able to launch this mission and possibly save the Uchiha, he was taken down by Danzo before Danzo had any Sharingan, all because Danzo brought along an Aburame who doesn't even technically exist in the manga and only exists in Itachi's second light novel, to paralyze Shisui so Danzo could pluck out one of his eyes. That's how embarrassing this telling of how Shisui lost his eye was for Shisui, Naruto's greatest potential man, that Kishimoto, alongside another author who was writing Itachi's light novels, had to go in and revise this moment, making it slightly less embarrassing for Shisui. Oh, because Shisui wouldn't just have one of his eyes plucked out by Danzo before Danzo had even an iota of the power he had while fighting against Sasuke. No way. Let's make a character and name him Yoji Aburame, and he has a mosquito-sized insect that when it bites you, it paralyzes you and fills you with a toxin that's untraceable and kills you in just a matter of minutes. Because otherwise, how would this Anbu captain, the youngest ever person to awaken his Mangekyo Sharingan, get jumped by Danzo and just Danzo, and after his eye pulled out, why would he throw himself into a waterfall? None of it makes sense. Make it make sense. And what's worse is that when Kodo Matsukame is eventually used by Danzo on Mifune, not only is it immediately foiled because one guy had a Byakugan, but you can break people out of the effect of Kodo Matsukame the same as any other genjutsu. And thus Shisui's plan was to use a genjutsu that would change the chakra flow of Fugaku in front of a group of people, all with Sharingan, who would be able to see the disrupted flow of Fugaku's chakra if they ever activated their Sharingan around him, and thus immediately would be able to break him out of the effect of that genjutsu. So this once-in-a-lifetime genius, the youngest ever awakener of the Mangekyo Sharingan, one of the strongest Uchiha of all time, not only has 0 feats outside of killing Mukai Kohinata, who you don't even know, but also his master plan wouldn't have worked. And his death was so embarrassing that they had to rewrite it in a light novel. So I'm sorry to all of my Megumi and Jujutsu Kaisen fans out there, but nobody is ever taking the potential man crown from Shisui. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. Who do you think is the greatest potential man in all of anime? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go rest my voice for like 12 hours.